Centuries of Oppression, The Road to 1918. Chapter 4. Battles for Representation. Who knows how many minor skirmishes there were between the peasant and landowning classes in the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries? One particularly significant movement started in 1549 near Norwich. By then, with the help of educated men, the peasants were able to draw up lists of grievances to be addressed, and by this time a religious tone was beginning to enter their rebelliousness. Here are just a couple of the 29 articles which the peasants were demanding. We pray that all bondmen shall be made free, for God made all free with his precious bloodshedding. We pray that no person of whatever estate, degree or condition he be, shall from henceforth sell the wardship of any child, but that the same child, if he live to his full age, shall be at his own chosen concerning his marriage. This peasant uprising was initially met with a force of 1,400 soldiers, but the soldiers were defeated. Then the Earl of Warwick threw 12,000 English troops plus 1,200 German mercenaries at them, and the peasants were slaughtered at the Battle of Dussindale. Some 3,000 peasants were killed. At least 50 more were subsequently executed for treason. This is just one illustration out of many of the price paid, invariably by men, for the incremental approach to the freedoms we now enjoy. As for universal suffrage, consider Cromwellian times. Perhaps emboldened by their defeat of the monarchy, some members of Cromwell's parliamentary army had the temerity to support calls for universal male suffrage. What cheek, in 1647! These were the Levellers. Their significance lies in their attempt rather than their success, continuing the struggle begun by the 14th century peasants' revolt and continued by the Dussindale martyrs, but becoming bolder still in their demands. Perhaps their greatest significance lay in their continuance of the theme of increasing political awareness. To quote Harrison, "The Levellers subscribed to a simple labour theory based on the natural right of every man to the fruits of his own labour, with the corollary that to take it away was theft. They scorned and resented the classes above them who did not work but who arranged the world for their own convenience and profit. They wanted an effective say in the making of decisions which closely affected them, and they saw that they would never achieve that without political power. Hence their concern for democratic government at the local and national levels." Obviously radical nutjobs. The Levellers had a theory that because all their woes were caused by the landowning nobles, their troubles all originated with William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard as they called him, who installed his Norman lords throughout the land. There are some who think that that is still the case today. None of the Levellers' demands were met in their own day, and their practical achievements were negligible. Ostensibly, much the same can be said of the Chartists in the 19th century. And yet, would greater democracy and freedom have ever been achieved without earlier unsuccessful attempts? Who knows? Villainage finally came to an end with the 1601 Poor Law, an act which applied until the Victorian era and transformed provision of poor relief. Each parish was made responsible for its own poor relief, funded by local rates and administered by locally elected officials, many of whom were women, as we shall see shortly. For all the revolting peasants and reforms through the 16th and 17th centuries, it was still only an extremely tiny minority who owned virtually everything. A remarkable survey of the wealth of the nation was carried out by Gregory King in 1688. This revealed that the majority of people were in poverty in the sense that their annual expenditure exceeded their income, so were presumably receiving some degree of poor relief or charity. King's survey was based around the family, confirming this remained the unit considered most appropriate for economic purposes. However, family in this context meant household, and so might include servants or other subservient people. England was considered to comprise 1,350,000 families, or 5.5 million individuals. Although 110,000 families were classified as shopkeepers, artisans, tradesmen or craftsmen, it was still agriculture that accounted for 3/4 of people's occupations. Conditions for apprentices in the trades had, by the early 18th century, changed little from those of the 14th century. Harrison records an account by one William Hutton of his apprenticeship with a weaver between 1737 and 1744. In truth, few trades truly required 7 years to learn, but the apprentice received little or no remuneration. So, once he was proficient, he would spend the later years of his apprenticeship being as productive as his master, and hence earning well for his master, but little or nothing for himself. Harrison notes, "The master's wife still figured large in an apprentice's life. Hutton's master's wife was dominant, hypocritical and mean, and grudged him every bit of food he ate. It was considered by the mistress almost a sin to eat." The Hutton family was not blessed with supportive wives. His father died following 6 years of agony from, and I quote, "bladder stones, severe poverty, and the greater severity of a cruel wife." At the completion of his apprenticeship, Hutton asked his master if he could set up a frame, a weaving loom, in his room, paying as appropriate in order to qualify himself as master. His master cheerfully agreed, only to be overruled later by his wife. There is plenty of evidence here that women were anything but doormats. Harrison notes that Hutton's autobiography serves to remind us of the centrality of the family as a social unit. The extent to which everyday living and working were dependent upon family relationships comes out clearly in its pages.